Welcome to the App Advisory Show, your fortnightly dose of all things cloud accounting, apps, and app advisory.
Hey guys, on to session 4 regarding the ultimate guide to app advisory. So in this one, we're going to talk around the finance function, and I talk a lot about digitize the finance function. So let's go through what a finance function is. To give you some clarity, and there's also in the book there's an abstract template you can start to create your own as you run through it. The reason I go through the finance function is 2 reasons. I think we need to define what a finance function is as a firm. So this is a general view of a finance function. You might have a different view, but you need to define what that is. And also, I think if you speak to an SME, they're not entirely sure what is in a finance function. So it's really important that we do describe and detail what is in a finance function. Okay, so let's have a run through it. So obviously you've got bookkeeping software, and this is the Xero, QBO, Free Agent, Sage Cloud, Cashflow, whatever's in your world. It's the standard area where we will do the majority of the processing. It's what will do the compliance returns. And also obviously has the availability to give us some reports, whether that's standard P&L and management type, or whether it's the compliance reports, it will give us that. So that's a known part of cloud accounting, and any firm that's looked into this will have one of those in place. Maybe have a few in place, and I just want to touch on that. If you're a firm that is allowing the client to dictate what cloud accounting or bookkeeping software is going to be used, if you've got 4 or 5 or 6 within your firm and they're all cloud systems, and I think a couple of vendors have said they do at least 500 to 1,000 to 2,000 updates a year, times that by 4 or 5, how many vendors you've got a lot of changes to keep on top of. So my point there is you just need to be thinking, do we want to be a jack of all trades, or do we want to master one? And I'm always up for you to have a default one that you want to run with, okay? It means you can master it, you'll know everything about it, you'll understand the integrations that go with it. You need to use others for certain scenarios with clients, but ultimately we need to be, I think personally, mastering one particular bookkeeping software, and then maybe you can start to replicate that with others. I think when clients choose, it can leave you a bit thin on quality and experience. Okay, next one we talk about is invoice automation. So this is about getting data from those purchase invoices, or even the sales invoices, and automating that entering of the data. So it'll hold a digital copy. So it could be a scan, it could be scanned in on a phone, it could be a scanner, however it's done. And essentially that then brings the data into the cloud accounting software, and extracts all the detail, adds it into the cloud accounting system, and holds a digital copy, which is great, certainly for digital compliance that we certainly in the UK we have to comply with now. Okay, so that's invoice automation, and what we're really looking to replace there is replacing the bag and box, and it's replacing the people inputting it, whether that's the client and somebody within their business, or whether it's within the firm. Okay, so that's what we're looking to do with that. Expense management. Lots of businesses, and I still, when we deal with SMEs, ask them about their expense management process. It's still whatever we did years ago, actually, quite a lot of the time. So it's going to be, here's a set of receipts in a tin, or stapled to a manual spreadsheet, which we fill in, or a manual form. And actually, we've got a lot of options. We can do reimbursable type expenses, which are in a lot of the core platforms, and there's expense apps that we'll use. And there's also the preloaded with money type of expense solutions as well now. So again, expense management, we're looking to replace that manual way of working. In my pre-cloud accounting days as a business owner, I lost thousands because I used to put all of my receipts in a tin, do them like once a year or twice a year, and one year I left that tin on top of a radiator, and essentially that heat just took all of the writing off all the receipts. So I just had loads of blank paper. So I'm there, and in my corporate world, my expense claim was a manual form with all of my receipts pinned to it. So I did that because that's all I knew. So we've got to be able to speak to clients a little more about what their options could be with this. Credit control, huge one, right? I think this is essentially about helping people collect money. So we want to make sure we've got some efficient ways. One thing to bear in mind is, what do SMEs even think credit control is? Like, I actually think some people just think it's somebody who comes in and like picks up a phone and chases people for an invoice, or maybe does some letters. But essentially now, credit control, you can automate a lot of this. You can really do the invoice chasing, even the pre-due date reminders to say this is due, and you can automate a lot of that software. But where this fails, right, is if, going back to the cloud adoption that we spoke to before, if you're adopting cloud accounting and it's only being updated 4 times a year for compliance reasons, or once a year, you actually need, for good efficient credit control, you need your sales ledger up to date once a week. Okay, so again, people sign up to the credit control solutions, great, and then go, I'm going to try and apply this, but we're not updating this system, maybe even once a month, once a quarter. You can't utilize those credit control systems. So mega useful, really should be a lot around that. But we do have to educate SMEs on what credit control is, what good credit control is, and understand that actually credit control, yes, there's an element of chasing invoices, but there's also good payment collection, isn't there, up front, which I'll talk in a little bit when we go to payment. So credit control, tend to be actually replacing manual credit control, which could be a person who comes in and does this once a month or once a quarter and does some debt collection phone calls for us, or actually it's replacing no credit control, which is more worrying actually. So again, we should certainly be looking at that, and we need to educate clients on that. Invoice approval. So this is where you'll see businesses where they've got an invoice which comes in from a purchase or maybe for a sale, and if it's over a certain amount or for a certain supplier or customer, it has to go through an invoice approval, which might be dockets on a whiteboard, it might be a stamp that goes round, that certain people have to stamp it before it goes through to be processed. Ultimately, we can actually replace these with systems now. In the core systems, you can do standard things like invoice in draft, invoice for approval, invoice approved, but actually you can get a lot more with some other systems in and around this, where it can actually automate that workflow based on the amount, the customer, the supplier, the person who's raised it. You can get really quite neat on invoice approval. So there's some really good systems out there that you could link in with that. And again, there'll be certain systems for certain people, and other people need something more complex. So it's not about just picking one, but it's about understanding the problem of invoice approval. But certainly in these pandemic times where people have gone more remote, those manual dockets, those manual stamps have got to be replaced. What with? Invoice approval software. Okay, payments receiving. So this is about taking payments, right? So I talked about credit control earlier. I'll give you an exact scenario. So taking payments is things like Stripe and PayPal and WorldPay and whatever else is in that equation, right? Ways that we can take payment. So it can be that we need to let the client understand that there's better ways of taking payments, so not just always backs or give us a phone call. Exact scenario that I come across a lot. A business will have on their invoice that you can ring this number if you want to pay by card, okay? Now, ultimately, that's the client's got to remember to ring, and then the person's got to be at the end. And in these strange times of remote working, that's a bit of a headache in itself. Then we've got to use a card terminal. Then we've got to get it through, and then we've got to reassign it in the back end to what payment it was, right? Turning that on its head into a new world, why can't we have a Stripe or whatever it might be on the actual invoice? Press this button to pay. The client pays on the card there and then. In it goes into the cloud accounting system, and we reconcile that way, okay? The client, from a client experience perspective, hasn't got to take the phone call, hasn't got to have somebody sat there. It can all be done for them, and actually it then correlates with the actual invoice. So we can really be a lot neater in receiving. So it's not just going, oh, here's Stripe, how you use it, but think about how you use it with a cloud accounting system, right? The same with the direct debits. We've got recurring invoices. We've got things like Go Cards. I know Stripe does direct debits as well now. But again, thinking about those, whatever region you're in, you've got solutions. But in terms of credit control is chasing at the back end. But how can we get them better some better practices in terms of actually taking payment. Okay, so there's a little bit of work to be thinking about with that. Payments outgoing, so this is things like Teleroo and Credec and TransferWise, enabling that improved process of payments using the systems we've got. So if there's payment runs and things like that, you can actually start to use these systems in those areas, right? So we can think about looking at what people do currently and what's a better way. And again, if it's very manual, very office-based, very office approved in terms of what you need to do, and I know that some firms don't like the risk in terms of logging into people's banks. It negates that to an element as well. So again, something there that you can think about in terms of how people pay outwardly. Cash flow forecasting. How many people actually do cash flow forecasting? I don't know. Some people do it in their head, probably. I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding on cash flow in general from a business perspective. So I think when I speak to accountants, they're thinking of full three-way forecasting and all of that. And then in terms of when I speak to an SME, they're like what I call keep me alive cash flow. What does 13 weeks look like? And certainly when do we go bust? That type of scenario. So I think when you're speaking to a client, rather than assume what cash flow means, ask them what it means. And I think when I speak to other SMEs about it, where does cash flow happen? I have a bit of a spreadsheet which they run themselves, and it'll be very crude. Or actually, it's in their head, and they're thinking, okay, I need to get this cash flow, and it's sort of okay in my head. So I think that we really need to educate them on what can be achieved, but also I think we need to really define what cash flow means for that particular client. But good opportunity. I think it's definitely needed, and I think we do need to educate SMEs on it though. Reporting in general, I've got this one here. I think most businesses try and do some sort of reporting at some point, whether it's half yearly, quarterly, monthly, even yearly. And again, I think we need to decipher what reporting means. What do you get when it's management reporting? Okay, like in the accounting profession, know what management reporting is, but for a business owner, what insights does that management reporting give me? What, break that down a little bit, make me understand what that can mean, and does that mean that we can make more informed decisions based on this? So reporting, when the cloud accounting vendors came out, there was little reporting, so we had lots of reporting engines which linked on the back. The reporting, the cloud accounting vendors themselves, reporting engines have improved quite a lot, but ultimately, I think we've just got to start using these. If you can get the data right and you can spend some time getting the reporting templates right, it becomes a lot less effort to actually then provide these reports because you've done the work up front. Also, with the report, we're going to talk about educating SMEs, show them what a pack might look like. Don't assume we know what that is, right? Some people are visual, some people need to go away and read, some people just need to listen. So you've got to cater for all of those. But loads of reporting functions out there, reporting apps, and actually pushing each other quite hard with new features. But ultimately, it's down to quality of data, and it's down to frequency of data, and it's down to reporting output. And maybe not assuming every single client will want the same reporting output, but if you give them something to start with, they can then come to you and say, actually, this is really good, but we'd like X, Y, and Z on top. And then you're into a proper conversation around what the requirements might be. Finance funding, this has been a huge area of growth now, right? Where, you can have systems which plug into our cloud accounting and will give us an idea of what we could be achieving as invoice finance, whether that's lending, whatever type of world that is. And I think that's really brought quite a lot of larger firms have corporate finance areas and things like that. Well, we're really starting to digitize that area and bring that visibility down into the SME. And I think the finance funding world is really quite an interesting one. We have not really including finance funding, even like fintech banks and things like that, which are huge growth area as well. But finance funding, you've got several systems now which are starting to link in with the cloud accounting, certainly in the UK. And from that information that's in the cloud accounting system, you start to get a much quicker response on what you could have or what you need to have in place in order to think about the funding options you've got. So really interesting to have those. Now, So just to summarise, you've got an app stack, and essentially it's not about picking and understanding every single app against each element. It's actually about understanding you've got options for each of those areas. Try and come up with a set that you want to primarily use, but understand that you might speak to a client where your standard invoice automation tool, for example, isn't fit for purposes for clients, and you might need to go and look out at some other systems that maybe handle some more complex scenarios. So this is about getting something written down, understood, and clear that you know you can refer back to, but understand it's not always going to have all the answers. You're going to speak to clients and they're going to need something different. So on this template, you could add your sector-based or anything like that. Okay, we'll leave it at that for AppStack and digital finance function, and I will see you in the next episode. Cheers, guys.